You describe the book very movingly about how you came to have a sense of injustice, and it happened when you were a young person.
When I was at university, I was sent off to Berlin to do a course in German, and on the way back, this is the time when there was still huge tension between East and West, great trouble with the Soviet Union. We were coming on the train from Berlin through East Germany, and there was a group of people stuffed onto the train, which was jam-packed. Absolutely, we were all squished into this little compartment. And it turned out, after I chatted to these people for a bit, who were very, very nervous, that they were being moved, finally, into West Germany, having been sort of marooned at the end of the war. And 20-odd years later, here they were, finally being shunted out of the East into the West. And they were going to a new future, and they had all their worldly goods with them. And there was a big gang of them, and they were sort of, every so often, they'd ask me a question or two. They knew nothing about the West. They were terrified about coming to the border. And the train stopped short of the border of West Germany. There we were on Eastern territory, and all the people were ordered out of the carriage. Huge shouting, people were prodded with rifles, they were stuck up against the side of the train, they were just terrorized. I'd done my British bit, sort of saying, you know, sort of, I'm British, so I decided to sit there. And just before they were all off, and a couple of the old ladies were left on, one of the sort of rather more bold younger women said, you know, would you take the baby for a bit? She had her tiny baby wrapped in a huge great shawl. She said, you know, would you sort of, and I said, look, fine, fine. Took it, sat there. So when the guards came on and they shouted, I produced a passport, hung on to the baby, and they prodded these old ladies and they shouted to everyone. Finally everyone piled back on the train. They were in a terrible state. They'd had things taken from them, their bundles had been thrown out the window and were left in the field as the train chugged off. This was all they had. Their worldly goods were being thrown out by these soldiers. And when we got across the border, I said, this is West Germany, it's the Helmstedt crossing point, you're safe. They didn't believe it. And then finally, one of the old ladies broke down, took the baby from me, and unwrapped the shawl, and out fell all their jewelry and their gold. Everything they'd ever saved. And I suddenly felt, hang on a moment. Only because I was hanging on to it. They could have lost everything. How can people treat other people like this? Why? What's the reason? How dare they? And I think I was particularly felt strongly about it. I was only about 18 or 19. And I'd never seen anyone treat anybody of my parents' generation like that.
Not seen them fearful.
No. How could you actually... How dare you do that to other people? I still feel strongly about it. I loathe the sight of violence. It's people bullying people, people with guns threatening others. I think it's wrong. Absolutely wrong.
You've been threatened with a gun?
Yeah, and I'm a complete and utter sheep. You know, I just say, what do you want me to do? I get terrified. I'm very, very frightened. Very frightened. I mean, You were nearly murdered by one Libyan. Yes, yes, I nearly lost it. I've got little bits of me missing. I've been very lucky.
You've been shot 4 times?
Yeah, little bits are missing, nothing vital.
Yeah. What about the business about being the woman in this man's game? I mean, whichever way you look at it, it's dominated by men. When you're going into a war like into the Gulf, I mean, you're sharing your entire existence with 2,000 other guys. I mean, little practical problems of being a woman in life with all these men. Tell me.
Shall we talk lavatories?
Oh, shall we?
I found it. I went off in uniform with the British Army in the Gulf War, and I was very apprehensive about it, and I thought, how am I going to actually cope? There were 2,000 blokes in my unit and me. How was it? The first morning we'd actually deployed into this very flat desert, very stony, bleak place in northern Saudi Arabia, and everybody raced out of the tent, got their plastic bowls and started washing. I realized all the blokes were, you know, stripping down. So I sort of sat there for a bit going, on the sand, and finally realized the only thing to do was to go back in the tent, because they really were stripping down. You know, they didn't want this sort of woman who's old enough to be their mother sort of looking at them, you know, going, oh, fine, yes. So I went back in the tent, and I solved that, you see, and I got washed sort of quietly by myself. And then there's the next thing you have to do. And I thought, right, fine, this is a desert, palm trees. There are no palm trees in that part of the Libyan desert for about 1,000 miles. There are no hills. There are no dunes. It's flat. And every time I look around, there's another 300 blokes. I grew absolutely desperate. So the first day I gritted my teeth and didn't drink much water. I kept saying, they must say, drink 3 litres of water a day. Thank you. Yeah, fine. All right. And so I waited until nightfall. So I set off 200 yards only from the camp, which was what we were allowed to do in the dark, otherwise I was going to get very lost. Following a tank track so that you didn't sit on a mine, yes. Just in case, don't be a surprise. And, you know, performed. Feeling really rather strange in the dark and wondering which way to look and hoping there wasn't a moon. And I did this for 3 nights running. And I came back, and on the 4th morning, the colonel in charge of our unit, who was an absolute charmer, said to me, Kate, could we have a word about the properties of the British Army Standard Issue SA-80 rifle? And I said, why? I said, you know, we journalists don't have guns. Thank God, because we'd have shot each other by then. And he said, well, I'd like to talk about the properties of this rifle. It may, Kate, he said, interest you to know that whatever its sort of property is when it comes to shooting people, it's got a bloody good night sight on it, Kate, and they're all using it. So don't bother wait till nightfall.
Could you do this job that she does?
I don't think I could. I mean, I do admire your cool, and I admire the fact also that you get into dangerous situations. We never could. Whenever we got into dangerous situations, it was a complete farce. We were in Algiers on Sahara. We were about the first film crew to be allowed to go into the Casbah, which is the centre of revolutionary activity in Algiers, and we had about 40 police, and we were briefed as to what to do before going in there, and we were outside the Casbah being told, you know, you can only walk this way, there'll be someone here, be someone there. And suddenly we heard some noise and vehicles coming sharply around the corner. And we all rushed and flat on the ground behind any vehicles. It was a little wedding party going by. A group of people playing pipes in the background, and other jolly men in red hats throwing almond cookies around. And I was absolutely, you know, well.
So can I ask you, are you gearing up for Iraq? I mean, do you think, so 2 questions, do you think it might happen? And if it does, will it be there?
I never speculate. It's one of the rules of my game. I've seen the unexpected so often that I don't take and spend the time thinking what might be. And the other thing is, I do remember now, back to the time in the desert when we were doing that Gulf War, and I remember my fear. I was very frightened. I was not so much frightened that I might end up as a sort of small pile of something disgusting as a result of a chemical attack. It wasn't so much that. It was the thought that all of these people around me who you get to know, because it's an extraordinary kind of time when you get to know people quickly and you appreciate them and you're all part of this extraordinary unit. And I thought of all of these great guys who were around me. I could not bear the thought of them not coming back. I've never forgotten that fear, the apprehension I had about that. And I therefore don't look ahead to that sort of possibility again. But if you have to do something, well, you do it.
Kate Adie, thank you very much indeed. Kate Adie.